From the Kansas City Sports Update Studio, this is the Richard Smith Show, where we talk about all things Kansas City Chiefs, brought to you by Arrowhead Update. Don't forget to check out our Royals Update podcast with Kevin Mong. Check us out on iHeartRadio, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, SoundCloud, Spreaker Player FM, YouTube, and all third-party applications. Also check us out on all major social media platforms. And if you can't find us there, just Google The Richard Smith Show and Kansas City Chiefs, and I promise you will find it. Let's talk Chiefs. How are we doing, Chiefs Kingdom? It is everybody's favorite day of the week during football season. It is Sunday. It is a day for relaxation. It is June 2nd. And we are here to talk about the Chiefs defense and break it down to the finest grit. And with me today to help accomplish this feat is our senior NFL analyst, Chris Chavez. How are we doing today, Chris?
I'm doing fantastic, man. Well rested. And yourself?
Good. I'm doing great. Battling ear infection, but that's neither here nor there. That doesn't affect the Kansas City Chiefs. So basically today I want to start out with on our show, I want to touch base on what a 4-3 defense is. And a 4-3 defense is an alignment consisting of 4 down linemen and 3 linebackers. And it is called a base defense. And that has changed up from the Bob Sutton 3-4 defense that we were running last season. And we will start off with, Chris, let me ask you. So with the defense that we have put together, basically from the ground up, coaching staff and all, can the Kansas City Chiefs return to form as one of the most feared defensives in the league, like we had been all the way through the 90s and most of the 2000s?
Oh, man. I think that we're still missing some key pieces to being that feared of a defense. I think that this offseason definitely will start moving us in that direction. I think that we're definitely going to have a very formidable front line. Even with the depth that we have there, we're going to have great rotation. So kind of like the Jags for the last couple of years, we're going to be able to rotate players in and out and be able to have put together consistent pressure against the quarterback. Our secondary, which was our weakness last year, I think this through this offseason became one of our strengths as well. But as far as an all-around formidable force like the 90s defense, I think we're still a year away from being at that level.
But you do feel like we can get to that level with?
Oh yeah, absolutely, we could. And I'm not saying that it's impossible for us to get there this year. But there are a lot of question marks at linebacker, at least for me, that keeps me from saying yes, we're there.
Fair enough. And with that being said, you had touched base on how lacking our secondary was last year. And to be realistic, in our Bob Sutton run defense, I mean, everything was lacking. So I think today I'd like to start with our defensive schemes, and let's focus on running and running downs, because look, we got the ball ran down our throat last year, and so I think that stopping the run is another key aspect that we really need to focus on. And you've there in the notes you've brought up a lot of good points, and I'm going to go ahead and let you take off on what you think will improve on the running aspect of our defense.
Okay, so during my research, I found out that Spags likes to use a lot of base defense, the 4-3, on running downs, which is typically on first and second down, which means that we're going to see a lot of pre-snap split safety looks, but just before the snap, he'll usually bring a safety down to about the linebacker level, if not down to the D-line, and just to show that we're going to be pressuring. Which in his defense, he really likes to utilize the versatility of safeties. He likes to be able to bring them down and cover the slot. He likes to be able to use them as a linebacker to blitz, or just to put them against a wide receiver and have them covered. We're going to be able to, by bringing the safety down, we're going to be then, quote unquote, stacking the box. We're going to have eight players in the box to cover the run, which is a very formidable or very, very valuable thing for us, because that was, like you said, one of the things that really was our Achilles heel last year. But then we also have the speed at safety to be able to then drop back out of that look and then be able to cover against the short or the long passing game.
I think that using the safeties, the way that Spags is going to, will also be able to disguise a lot of coverages and disguise a lot of blitzing packages as well. And honestly, what I saw about Spags from the past is I love it when he brings a safety down and he fakes the pass rush and then brings it from somewhere else. I mean, this guy is really, really talented at covering or disguising his coverages.
No, absolutely, and that's the great thing about having, quote unquote, 4 linebackers as far as like how they're going to line up. There you have then 4 different places where the blitz could come from. It could come from the right outside linebacker, or one of the quote-unquote inside linebackers, or one of the other outside linebackers. And when I say that, that's counting one of the safeties as that linebacker. Or we could even do a combination of the two. We could then have a blitz come from both of the outside linebackers. Or the safety drops back into coverage. And so it's going to be a really great option for us to be able to hide that blitz and where it's coming from, which was one of the things that Sutton was good at as far as bringing blitzes and somewhat disguising where they were coming from. And he had a plethora of blitzes, but having this option as well is going to be really great for us. Because and this is kind of one of the differences with Sutton was last year, where he preferred the single back safeties, but Spags instead likes to have the split safeties, but he uses them and disguises them in a way that they play more like linebackers.
Okay, right. And look, Spags obviously expects a lot out of his safeties, and I feel like with the progression of how we've changed our scheme, I felt like Bob Sutton relied a lot on our cornerbacks, because that's really all the man did was blitz, and he left our corners on islands, and our safeties weren't really producing last year. But I feel like in this system he would Spags absolutely rely more on the safeties, as Sutton relied on our cornerbacks.
Yeah, last year Sutton was more of a man defense or man coverage. With Spags, he's going to see a lot, or we're going to see a lot more of zone schemes to rob the routes while keeping the bigger linebackers underneath to cover anything under the coverage. Like we kind of said, Spags is going to expect a lot of his safeties. They're going to be all over the field. Pretty much, they're going to be the MacGyvers of the defense. They're going to be rushing the quarterback. They're going to be covering the wide receivers. They're going to be covering the nickel. I mean, they're going to be doing everything in this defense.
And we'll have spy coverages too, and I really like that. That's something that Sutton really didn't do in his defense. And us changing our scheme will give us the ability to add that element as well.
No, absolutely. And being able to, and that was one of the other things that we had to, or when we went in against rushing quarterbacks, was always a concern for us, because we had to rely on our front seven to be able to stop them, because we knew that we had to keep our safeties back in coverage because our cornerbacks were suspect.
Which killed us
I'd say even more. No, absolutely. But being able to have that spy coverage back there, especially with the speed at safety that we have, and having trust in the scheme, we're going to be able to cover so much more ground on defense than we were last year.
which ultimately, when we play these teams that have quarterbacks that can run the ball, they will absolutely torch us like they have been.
Yeah. Well, and kind of going back to the scheme that Sutton had, it really allowed for opposing offenses to create mismatches and to start to pick on certain cornerbacks or spots in the field where there were gaps in the coverage. But with Spag's scheme, opposing offenses are going to be less likely to create those bad matchups against our defense because he's going to be playing more zone.
Well, then, and in your mind, then, with that being said, who do you think teams are going to pick on this year? Because, with changing the scheme, there's going to be players all over the field. We're in a zone defense, but they're going to have to find a weakness somewhere on the field. And where do you think our weakness is?
Well, at cornerback, I think that they're going to, or at the beginning of the season, they're going to be really trying to pick on Breland, just because he's coming off of an injury. And until he proves that he can hold his own, I think that they're going to keep going after him. But once he does, he proves that he's healthy and that he's ready to go and he's 100%, and back to the form that he was at way back in Washington, I think they're going to then target Fuller. And if Fuller can take that step to being a legit outside cornerback, which I think we all hope that he does, then I think that they're going to start going after our nickel, which would be Charvarius Ward. But as we saw last year, he was a rather formidable force, and throughout the entire season, he just kept getting better, yes, which I think is going to really help with his confidence. And I really wouldn't be surprised if by the end of the season, Charvarius Ward makes a move out to the outside cornerback spot, and Fuller ends up moving down to the nickelback. And that's no knock against Fuller. It's just that when he was in Washington, that's where he was one of the top-rated cornerbacks. And Charvarius Ward has the length at cornerback to be able to be a force out there as well.
It'd be really nice to, get these cornerbacks back where they're comfortable, especially, with Fuller complementing Breland and Washington. But if we can get him back in that nickel spot, I think that our cornerback situation will be a lot better. And and that brings us into our next point here. Our safeties are one of our strongest position groups on defense, if not the strongest. And that's going to complement and help over the top, and even especially in a zone coverage, with these cornerbacks. But our defensive line is another strong position group on the defense. Obviously, one of the strongest. In your mind, where are we at? What is the strongest position group on our defense?
Oh man. Okay. I think it's very, very close, and I kind of touched on this at the beginning, but I think it's very close between our D-line and our secondary. Our safeties got tremendously better this offseason by bringing in Honey Badger and Thornhill. Both of them are very versatile safeties. We still have Jordan Lucas, who was very serviceable for us last year, as well as Armani Watts, who early on in the season before he got injured showed he was coming along and had some potential there. I think Sorensen is serviceable as well, but I think we would be a little crazy to go into the season with 5 safeties. And unfortunately, I think that Sorensen might end up becoming a camp casualty. Mm-hmm. But at our D line, man, these guys, you look at what we're going to have as far as starters with Clark, Jones, Williams, I'm assuming Xavier Williams, and Okafor there. I say that for those guys as our starting base defense, but if we get down to second and long, third and long passing downs, you absolutely should expect to see Derek Nottie and Breland Speaks, K-Pass, working in there as well to start to rush that passer. And I would even say that we could potentially even see one defensive tackle and 3 defensive ends on that line just to really get after that quarterback. We've got some tremendous depth on our D line. I mean, you've got K-Pass essentially as our 5th defensive end as far as depth goes, and he's a former second-round pick. Speaks is another second-round pick from last year. I mean, we've got some real talent there on that defense, and Spags is very well known for his 4 aces, so to speak, in the New York Giants system, where he constantly had a rotation going. And I think here in Kansas City, if both K-Pass and Speaks develop to the level that they're capable of being at, Spags could outdo what he did with the Giants, and he could have 5 aces. And as any betting man knows who's ever played poker, you can't beat 5 aces.
No, definitely can't. Very well put, too. I love that. Very, very, very well put. Yeah, and we're absolutely moving in that direction. And there's going to be some players that are going to have some breakout seasons, this coming up season that we really, thought were busts last year, but we just didn't understand what was going on within the organization. And one of those guys is Reggie Ragland, who's lost some weight. And Spags is kind of high on this guy. Tell us a little bit about Reggie Ragland and why Spagnuolo is kind of thinks this guy's going to fit the mold for us.
Okay, so Ragland has lost some weight, and Spags has said that he fits the Mike mold, which would be the middle inside linebacker. What question that brings up to me, though, is Ragland going to be the starter at inside linebacker? Or, because I think everyone was kind of expecting Hitchens to be there. Mm-hmm. But I've also seen Hitchens is, and this isn't necessarily coming from the Chiefs, but I've seen people who are expecting Hitchens to be the outside linebacker, the strong outside linebacker. Mm-hmm. And if that happens, okay, so we have Hitchens as the strong, we have Ragland as the inside, and then who's going to be the weak side? It's going to be kind of a toss-up between Darren Lee and Dorian O'Daniel. And given the defense and how we kind of set it up, I think it'll make more sense to have O'Daniel there in our base defense. But when we end up going to the nickel back, or the nickel coverage, we'll probably bring in Darren Lee, to be that linebacker for us.
Okay, and the kind of the way I look at our defense this year is we have so many versatile players. I mean, Spags can really put these guys anywhere. The defensive line, linebacking core, I mean, I feel like that we're going to see so many different looks that we're not even going to be able to keep up. And that's a really, really, really good thing. We've been lacking versatility and on the defensive side of the ball. And also, I think the biggest thing for the Kansas City Chiefs on the defense, and we touched base before this, is details. Steve Spagnuolo and Matt House are detail-oriented and in-your-face type of coordinators. And so he's going to get the most out of all of these guys, and no matter what package that we're in. And I just think it's going to be a shifty, crazy, fast defense that it's going to be the most impressive aspect of the team this year. I mean, we expect, what we do out of the offense. That's just a given. But, I mean, we're going to get really surprised by the defense this year.
No, absolutely. And we're going to have a lot of surprises coming at us. I'm not sure how familiar the audience is with Spagnuolo's defense, but in his defense, nose tackles tend to put up some significant stats. And Derek Nottie, who didn't really get a whole lot of major playing time last year, but definitely got worked in pretty consistently last year, showed signs of being a disruptive interior force. as a rookie in the 3-4. But this year, moving to the 4-3, he's going to be able to use a lot more of the stunts and set up matchups that are favorable to him to get to the quarterback. And then you also add in Kalen Saunders, who we just drafted this offseason, to get some rotational play in there as well. We should be able to expect to see some flashes of his ability to get to the quarterback as well.
Which is great, because we need as much electric play on the defense as we can get, because that's been lacking in Kansas City for quite some time. So let's get in here to the depth chart. I think that's a really important thing for us to focus on and really give Kansas City an idea of where we are defensively, because, we say we're lacking at middle linebacker, and I want to give Kansas City an idea of why we are and exactly why we are, and where we're at, on the defensive line and safeties and so on and so forth. And obviously we've touched base on all these positions throughout this broadcast, but let's really hone in on our depth chart here. And I'm going to start out with the left defensive end and Alex Okafor, and then right behind him is Emmanuel Ogbah. And me personally, I look at both of these guys and both of these names. Look, both of them will absolutely get starting time. And please break down both of these players and what their roles are, because I think a lot of people are overlooking both of these players.
No, absolutely. So Ogbah and Okafor both came in rather somewhat undervalued. Okafor, if you paid attention to what he was doing, I believe it was with New Orleans, and the guy was being quite a force in their defense and was controlling the offensive line so that the linebackers could get to the running back and shut it down. Ogbah comes in from Cleveland. Never really worked out for them. He had some a good year here or there, but he never was able to turn that corner and be that formidable force that Frank Clark was able to develop into up in Seattle. I think for his entire career, Ogbah has last year he had 3 sacks. And I mean, you kind of expect more from a guy who was drafted as high as he was.
Right.
And so you kind of expect these guys to come in our system, be able to flourish.
Yes.
And to kind of just do what they do well. Okafor is going to be great against the run. Then Ogbah comes in, and he's going to be able to get after that quarterback. I think that, we're going to have a rotation kind of going at defensive end period. But imagine a Frank Clark coming in, and, it's been a 8-minute drive. Frank Clark gets rotated back in after he came off the field for a couple of plays, and he's fresh going up against a left tackle who's been out there having to shut down Frank Clark on the first 3 downs. And then Breland Speaks comes in, and K-Pass comes in, and it's having to rush him. And then you now have Frank Clark coming back in fresh and rested. I would hate to be that quarterback looking at that D-line.
Right, absolutely. And, here's the thing, and you bring up a great point here. We started with Okafor and Ogbah rotating in, and then we moved to, Clark, Speaks, and K-Pass. And it doesn't just stop there. When we go to nose tackle, you look at Chris Jones, then you have Xavier Williams right behind him. And I look for us to split ways with Xavier Williams at some point, but he is definitely a formidable part of our defense for his coming up season. But also Okafor, I want to go back to Okafor for a second. He was known as the hammer. He was known as the hammer in New Orleans. Yeah. And I feel like that he's going to be a bigger force on this defense. He's my guy to watch this season, for sure, hands down. Out of everybody who has any question marks, my guy is Alex Okafor. He's going to complement Chris Jones and Frank Clark for sure. Look, you put Okafor on one side and Clark on the other, and then you think about this, then you rotate them, both of them. You can put Clark on the left side and Okafor on the left side on a play if you want. You know what I mean? They're so versatile and there's so much depth here that it's going to be fun to watch.
Yeah, and I think in our scheme, I think that Okafor is going to be able to do something that he hasn't done since his second year in the league back in 2014 with the Cardinals, where he had 8 sacks, which is his career high for a single season. I think in this scheme and with this, I don't say tandem, with this depth, with these players, he's going to be able to top that this year. I think he's going to get to double digits.
I agree. And look, let's talk about Derek Nottie for a second. Our defensive tackle. You know, this is our hard-nosed guy on defense. This is a guy that we really rely on, you know, to get off of the tackle, the offensive tackle, and stuff the run or create pressure to get to have the quarterback roll out and get him in a bad position. But we also have Joey Ivy that we brought in from San Francisco. And I feel like that he's a good addition as well, with Justin Hamilton backing him up. What do you think as far as defensive tackle? I don't feel like there's as much depth at defensive tackle as everywhere else on the defensive line, but I think Derek Naughtie's really got, the anchor for the defensive line. Like, I feel like he is the guy that creates all these mismatches.
Well, as far as into the season goes, I think we're only going to keep probably about 4 defensive tackles on the roster. We might keep a 5th one for the practice squad. And the way that I foresee it, I think we're definitely going to have Chris Jones there at defensive tackle. I mean, if we let him go anywhere, I mean, that's just ridiculous.
Yes.
Noddy is absolutely going to be a staple on defense. And I think Xavier Williams is going to be a good run stuffer for us. I mean, he's a big body. We're going to keep him in there. So that's 3. And I really have to say that that's 4. So I think that's going to be where we're going to end up going into the season with. Everyone else, and I'm not saying that we won't, but just the way that I see it, I don't see us keeping 5 defensive tackles. So Hamilton, Ivy, and Kevon Walker, the other guy that was on our roster, I just don't see them being anything more than camp bodies for the time being.
And I agree, too, especially with Kalen Saunders coming in here because, look, if you line up at nose tackle in certain defensive schemes, you should be able to play defensive tackle position, too. And the way they're rotating and how talented Kalen Saunders is and the impact that he's having on OTAs, and really Spags and Matt House and Big Red are pretty high on this guy. I feel like he's going to make more of an impact than we thought he would coming out of the draft.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And kind of touching back on what you had mentioned earlier, I think the addition of Kalen Saunders does eventually lead to the exit of Xavier Williams. Mm-hmm. I just don't think that we're in a position where we're comfortable enough to let Xavier Williams go right now. I think probably after this season, we could probably end up letting him go and be comfortable with that.
And that's exactly where I stand with it too. We do need him this year. He really is a staple as far as depth in our defense, and like you said, he's a formidable run stopper. So you put him in this scheme and system, he's going to be more productive than he has been the last couple of years. So I look for everybody in our depth chart here to really have productive seasons, and it's going to be night and day. Like, I'm not going to be shocked at seeing these huge numbers and this huge turnaround compared to last year. It just seems like it's coming. And then let's talk about Frank Clark and Braylon Speaks and K-Pass. Like that defensive end, that right defensive end, we are just lock solid there.
No, absolutely. And I know that a lot of people have a lot of questions about K-Pass and what his true abilities are. But as we've seen over the course of his career, and I mean, granted, it's kind of short, but when he has been able to get on the field, he's been able to get after the quarterback. He's pressured him. There have been several huge hits that he's been able to lay on the quarterback. Mm-hmm. And for one reason or another, the play gets negated, whether it was a penalty called on K-Pass for roughing the passer, which when you watch the play and you listen to the rules, it wasn't roughing the passer, but or there's another penalty on somebody else somewhere on the offense or on the defense, and so it negates the play. The guy can play. The guy is 6'7", 285. I mean, he's a freak physically, and I think that if he gets enough reps and gets a chance to see the field more than he has in the past, I think he's going to surprise a lot of people.
He absolutely will. He's the most underrated player on the Kansas City Chiefs defense.
No, absolutely. And I would really like to see him maybe put on another 20 pounds. And again, this is just me kind of spitballing right now. I like to see him put on another 20 pounds, get up to 305, and at 6'7", and line up next to Chris Jones, who's 6'6", and having a 6'7" and a 6'6" defensive tackles in front of your quarterback, or in front of the quarterback, with those long arms. Who's going to be able to throw over that?
That would be great. Oh, I love that. I love that look. And you're right. I mean, and then you put quarterbacks, who just came into the league, the Cardinals quarterback. You put him behind or in front of that defensive line, he'll never be able to get the ball, past the DL.
Yeah, he'll have to go to a 6-8 step drop in order to be able to get over that defensive line.
Yes, absolutely. I love that. That's a great point and a good look. Okay, so let's move on to, in my mind, the most questionable position on the entire Chiefs roster, whether it be offense, defense, or special teams, and that is the strong side linebacker. We have Dorian O'Daniel, Jeremy Atachu, Ben Neiman, and Raymond Davidson. Give me your take on strong side linebacker, because look, I really honed in on Dorian O'Daniel when we drafted him last year. I believe he's out of Clemson. But again, our defense was terrible last year. I didn't like what I saw out of Dorian O'Daniel, and that's our starting strong side linebacker. And we really, depth, we have Ben Neiman, and that's really about it, who is a special team stud, but I don't see him being that formidable force, to be our starting strong side linebacker. So what's your take on Dorian O'Daniel and the depth that we're sitting at on the strong side?
Well, and that kind of goes back to the questions that we have at linebacker. Who's lining up where?
Right.
Aside from Hitchens, and who else is going to be starting? And where are they going to be playing? I think that Darren Lee is going to definitely be he has some ability. Absolutely. You're fourth highest rated linebacker in coverage. You have to be on the field to cover people. But my question mark on him is, can he play against the run? And if Darren Lee can play against the run, okay, you're an every down player. Get out there and play. But he'll probably end up being the weak side linebacker due to his size. He's 6'1", 232. And whereas Hitchens is 6 foot 235, he's another. I don't want to call him a tweener, but he's a little bit smaller and undersized.
Right.
But you kind of expect a bigger body to be your strong side linebacker, and Atachu is definitely that at 6'3", 252. But he and who's the other guy? Williams, I think it was the guy that we brought in from the Cowboys. Damian Wilson. I'm sorry.
Wilson, yes.
Damian Wilson. Wilson's 6 foot 245. We've got some depth there on the strong side linebacker side. It's just a matter of who's playing there. And with Ragland and he's currently listed at 6'2", 252. I don't know if that's his slim down weight or if that's the old weight. But he could end up being the inside linebacker. He could end up being the strong side linebacker. I'm really interested to see when we go into camp where these guys are actually lining up at. Because right now, like I've been saying, there's just so many questions.
Yes. And realistically, when you look at the weak side linebacker depth, I mean, it doesn't make sense the way it's put on paper compared to where we have everybody else positioned at our linebacking core, because on the weak side linebacker it shows a depth chart: Anthony Hitchens, Darren Lee, and Damian Wilson. And in my mind, I mean, that's not right. Look, Darren Lee or Damian Wilson should be on the right side somewhere, or on the strong side. And like you said, we don't know if Hitchens is going to line up in weak or middle. And you said that there's some rumors about him line up on strong.
Yeah.
So realistically, okay, we've covered every player in depth besides one guy that I want to bring up in the linebacking core, and I want to get your take. This is a rookie out of Texas, Gary Johnson. Look, I like the kid. He's a smart kid. His all-time favorite linebacker is Derek Johnson. That's his mentor. Do you think we got a steal in Gary Johnson?
With the depth that was in this year's draft and the quality of undrafted free agents that we found, I think it's absolutely possible that we found a steal in Gary Johnson. I've heard good things over the last 2 weeks about him coming out of OTAs, that he's performing really well. He's definitely been a stud at Texas. I mean, he's definitely a tackling machine. I think that it's going to be, going into cuts, it's going to be hard to cut some of these guys, because some of these guys that we cut, and I'm not saying that Gary Johnson would be a guy that we cut, but there are going to be guys that we cut from this team that will go on to other teams and put up significant numbers and get some significant playing time, because the other teams are so talent needy. And we've got some tremendous talent on this team, man.
And I think that's one thing that is being majorly overlooked on the defensive side of the ball. And even if we do let a player like Gary Johnson walk, which I doubt it will be him, like you said, but like say a Robert McCray or somebody, like we let them walk and they do go to another team, they are going to produce. Like we absolutely have talent like that on our team. All the way up and down the depth chart on defense, it's just like last year's offenses. How are we going to put it all together? What is going to be the cornerstone and the starting point to get us where we need to go? Because right now, you've made some great points. Our linebacking core is so up in the air. I have zero predictions. I don't know what they're going to do with them. But that's also a good thing, because Spags is such a genius-minded defensive coordinator. So,
yeah, I definitely have a good idea as to like who we're probably going to keep on the team, but as far as where they're going to line up and where they're going to play, that's a huge question mark.
Right.
And kind of like you were talking about, as far as like the depth goes, outside of our starters, I really think that the backup situation is going to really depend on what else can they bring to the team. And you can't really bring much to the team just sitting on the sidelines. But you look at Ben Neiman, who is a special teams, I don't call him an ace, but who's been tremendous on special teams. Mm-hmm. And if Gary Johnson can end up being that same guy where he can significantly contribute on special teams, that'll land him roster spots for sure.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. We're in a good spot. We're really, really in a good spot. But there's going to be some extremely hard decisions, for the coaching staff to make, which isn't a bad thing. I like that. I really like that. That means there's a lot of talent up and down. We just got to utilize it. So our linebacking core, extremely questionable. We don't really know anything about what's going on there. Let's move to the defensive secondary, which it's crazy to look at the depth chart, because as shaky as our defensive backfield is, we have more depth there than anywhere on the entire team. So it's, again, where are we going to line these guys up at? How can we make them fit into the system and be productive and not get burnt up and down the field like they all did last year? So we're going to start on the left side with Bashad Braylon, and behind him, another guy that I think is going to be up and coming is Keith Reeser, and then we have 3 rookies behind him: Miller, Soro, and Monroe. I believe a few of those are undrafted rookies. But what's your take on the left side of our defensive backfield?
So Bashad Breeland is coming off of an injury, and midway through the season, he ended up signing with Green Bay, and he was just kind of getting his footing back. He wasn't anything overly special, but he was just kind of getting his sea legs back, so to speak. And with the additional offseason that he'll now have, I think he'll have a lot more confidence in his body coming back from that injury to be able to play at the level that he's capable of playing at. Behind him, I mean, you brought up a really big name who I'm really excited to see what he can bring to the table in Riser. He was playing in the what was that league this spring, the football league?
Not the.
Anyways,
I know what you're talking about. The one that's probably not going to make it.
Yeah, the one that went bankrupt.
Yes.
And he was by far the highest rated cornerback in that league, and he has some history with us. He had signed with us, and I think he was with us for a year, got cut, and had been out of football for a little while, and then he ended up going to this league, and he just performed tremendously. And then as soon as that league folded, we threw a contract at him, and he was the first player signed from that league. And I think that he's definitely going to have a chance to show what he's got. Right now, I think and kind of like you had said, we've got some tremendous depth at cornerback, and if he can be a significant contributor on special teams, he'll make this roster.
Yes. I don't see him not making this roster.
No, not at all. I think he has a really good chance. But there's like 3 other guys that I'm really high on for that 5th. I don't see us keeping 6th, but that 5th cornerback spot. I think that's going to be a huge battle to get into that 5th slot for cornerback.
And I agree, but I also want to add to this. I feel like that Keith is in a perfect scenario for his career right now. You're coming back to a Kansas City Chiefs organization that is really in transition, and it's anybody's ball game. I mean, this man can steal Braylon's job if he just comes to work and does what he's supposed to. And I want to see the battle there. I don't care who's the starter as long as you're producing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that's the thing is you might be starting, but there are definitely backups who are gunning for you in this situation.
Yes. None
None of these guys are staples of the defense right now.
Not at all.
None of these guys are in their heyday, a Josh Norman or a Richard Sherman. None of these guys are that level cornerback for us.
Right.
And so everyone their job is to obviously go out there and shut down the wide receivers. But the 3, 4, and 5 guys, they have to be pushing the 1 and 2 cornerbacks to perform better, because if not, those guys want their jobs.
Right. And that goes for the other side too. That goes for the right side. And I'm gonna be honest here. I see our right side cornerback depth, and I see the nickel back, and that's going to be changed up. And we touched base on this before. They got the nickel. No, they do have Kendall Fuller in the nickel back. Okay, so they got Ward in the right side, Fuller in the nickelback, and Tremon Smith backing up Ward. Okay, see, I like that. That's, to me, that's what we will see on the field.
No, absolutely. I like Kendall Fuller's ability I like his agility. His change of direction is a lot quicker than Ward. Ward is great at playing the outside.
Mm-hmm.
And I think putting him out there is just putting him in a position to be his most successful. And utilizing Fuller's agility there in the slot is the smartest thing that we can do.
Yes, absolutely. And look, that'll also open up the season a little more for Tremon Smith, who I think is going to have a breakout year defensively as well as special teams.
Mm-hmm. Well, and that's going to be where things start to get really iffy is up until now, Tremon Smith's major contribution to the team has been on special teams, especially in the run or in the return game.
Correct.
We drafted 2 or 3 guys who can return the ball now, and I would venture to say are probably more of a threat than Tremon Smith. And so, unless he makes leaps and bounds in his coverage ability, he might potentially be a better player. He might not have the upside that some of these other guys bring to the table.
Right. But I still look at him as being one of those players as great depth. I cannot see us, cutting him loose this year after what he's done last year. And realistically, where we're at in our defensive cornerback core here, like we need him right now. I'd like to see us bust a move and maybe bring somebody else in. If we can get rolling in the second wave of free agency. I'm not really sure what's out there, if there's anything worth grabbing up, but it wouldn't hurt to try.
Yeah, no, and I agree. And that's the thing is you always have to be looking to get better. And right now, so a week or two ago, the talks were with the Washington Redskins losing a linebacker for the year with a torn knee ligament, that we could be looking to trade Ragland for Josh Norman. But as of today, those talks so far have been dead, or at least nothing's been reported on them lately. But what's coming out of Redskins camp is that Josh Norman might end up getting cut.
Oh, wow.
And they're at the point in his contract where it would be beneficial to them. It wouldn't necessarily count against them. They would be saving money by cutting him at this point. Where my concern is bringing him in, and in Washington, he hasn't really been that elite cornerback that we all know him as from the Panthers.
Right.
Which, he helped get them to the Super Bowl.
Yes,
but
correct.
If he can perform at that level that he was in Carolina, but I would absolutely take a chance at him, but he's going to be expensive. Now, on the flip side of that, with the June 2nd cuts now hitting hitting the salary cap, we freed up another $9 million today, and so we've got $24.5 million in free cap space.
Right. Now, say we bust a move on Josh Norman. In a way, I feel like we would be putting ourselves right back in the same situation that we were in with Marcus Peters.
No, and that's the other side of that we have to look at is, do we want to bring in somebody who has character issues?
Right.
And right now, everybody on this roster is gelling. And we've got a lot of new faces on defense. We've got a new scheme that everybody's trying to learn. And Josh Norman is more of a man coverage guy. He's not a zone cover guy. And I don't think that he would be great in our defense. I think he'd be more of a liability.
I do too. I think that he absolutely will turn into a cap casualty. He's absolutely a liability. And unlike Marcus Peters, when we cut him loose, Marcus Peters was in the upscale of his career. Josh Norman is on the back half of his career, and we can't afford to pay a a cornerback that we don't know for a fact is absolutely going to produce on our team or even fit this scheme. Like, I wouldn't mind having a lockdown corner, but to be perfectly honest with you, a lockdown corner and a zone coverage scheme is not necessary.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And with our corners, I mean, we're really young at cornerback.
Right.
We can mold these guys into the cornerbacks that we need them to be.
Yes, like, here's my thing is we have such a good offense. Like, we're not in desperation mode right now to go out and get a cornerback like Josh Norman and pay a hefty price and make a dumb move because our defense just needed to get a little better. So would I love us to go out and do that? Would it make sense to look? Yeah, it probably makes sense to look. But I think you're right on the aspect that we're young. Our whole team is young. It's time to build something and stop putting Band-Aids on an old wound. And so...
Yeah, and
go ahead.
Just kind of going with that same mindset, man. It's like that's what we had done forever at quarterback prior to drafting Patrick Mahomes.
Absolutely.
In the past, we always tried to put a Band-Aid over it and bring in other teams' quarterback disregards. You know, their throwaways. It worked out one year for us with Montana. And then we ended up throwing away the guy who should have been in our franchise quarterback, you know, for the rest of his career in Gannon.
Yes.
And I can't. The fact that we picked him over or Gerbach over him is just beyond me. But you know that's for another show. But we've seen how that works out. You cannot put a Band-Aid over it. You have to put the time and effort into developing your guys.
Yes, and honestly, Ryan Reed said it best. I believe it was on the 90s throwback episode when he said that the Chiefs had committed themselves for over 35 years to only looking for that veteran quarterback. They didn't want to go draft a quarterback. We were so set in stone on finding that veteran quarterback who's been around the league and, you know, has been around the block a couple times, and it just completely bit us in the butt for, 3 decades.
Yeah.
So moving on to, I think this is the last part of our depth chart breakdown, but this is also the strongest part of our depth chart is the safeties.
Yeah.
And so with the Honey Badger and us bringing in Juan Thornhill, which is huge. I can't wait for everybody to see Juan Thornhill and what he brings to the table. But even Jordan Lucas, Daniel Sorensen, you're on the decline, but we still got you around. And Armani Watts. In my mind, the safety position is the most solidified position on the field for the Kansas City Chiefs.
No, absolutely. And, I mean, you've got guys here who our backups could go to any other team in the league, and they would be starting for about half of them.
Right. Who was that?
Sorry, what?
Who was that cornerback that Pittsburgh picked up from us this past season? And in our mind, he was a garbage cornerback, but he got himself a $40 million contract in Pittsburgh.
Steven Nelson. Steven
Nelson, yes. And that's my biggest point. That's my anchor to drive in your point, but go ahead. I didn't mean to interrupt you.
Well, you're good. So while we viewed him as absolute garbage, he was one of the highest rated cornerbacks. What kind of helped was that he had been targeted 113 times.
Right.
And of those, he was able to shut down whatever percentage. And so he rates out as a higher cornerback. Whereas you look at Patrick Peterson ended up being one of, I want to say it was top 50 cornerbacks. He was down around 36, I believe. My numbers could be off here. But he was rated lower than Steven Nelson. But you look at the rating, the rating's a little misleading because, Steven Nelson's rated higher. Patrick Pearson was only targeted 20-some-odd times all of last season.
Right, and that's because quarterbacks are scared of him.
Against him.
And that's because quarterbacks are scared of him. I'm sorry to interrupt you. I did not mean to do that again. But You're right. I mean, when you're targeted more times, you have more of an opportunity to shut down the receiver or get those numbers. But Steven Nelson is a classic case of it looks way better on paper.
Yeah, and I tend to look more at, I don't look at percentages, I look at the numbers. And so I'll look at the times that a guy is targeted and then the number of completions allowed.
Mm-hmm.
And so, like in Patrick Pearson's example, he's targeted 20 some odd, let's say, okay, because I don't have the exact numbers in front of me. Let's say he's targeted 25 times and he allows 13 catches. Okay, that's a 50% catch rate.
Right.
Okay, how many of those were deflected? Okay, so now you have, let's say another 5 of those are deflections. You have 5 bad throws against them. Okay, I like those odds. I would bring him in. Whereas you look at Steven Nelson and just using a round number, let's say he's been targeted 100 times, and there's a 60% catch rate, so he allows 60 catches against those 100, but the deflections on the incomplete passes, let's say he has 15 or 20. That's a higher deflection rate.
Right.
Then I would like the fact that he's able to deflect those passes, and I would just need to have a stronger cornerback or a safety to help bring out that skill that he does have.
Right, correct. And honestly, my thing is when I look at those numbers that these teams go off of, if you're going to look at a cornerback who's targeted 100 times, you need to look at what was targeted on the other side of the field too. And then you get the median of those numbers and you find out exactly truly the potential of that player, because Steven Nelson is way overrated. He was targeted that many times because, let's keep it real, he was a bum. Let's say he caught that receivers caught 60 passes off of him. Well, 30 of them were probably 20 yards or more. So yeah. We're getting way off subject here. I want to get back because we're running out of time. Back to the safeties. We got Honey Badger, Thornhill, Sorensen, Lucas, and Armani Watts. That is absolutely our anchor and our strong point of our defense, and I think is going to be the key additions to getting us over that hump and getting to the Super Bowl and bringing the Lamar Hunt Trophy back to Kansas City. So your brief overlook on safeties, because we're running out of time here. What do you say about our safeties?
Okay, so starting wise, I mean, you kind of have to give him the experience leverage on the position, and starting the year, we're probably going to see Sorensen at starting safety. But by the end of the year, he's going to be done, and Thornhill's definitely going to take that from him probably by midseason. Honey Badger absolutely is going to be a formidable force back there. And then we have really quality depth with Lucas and Armani Watts. And I don't see us keeping 5 safeties. And I hate to say it because I like Sorensen and what he brings to the table as far as being able to stuff the run. But I don't see him as a versatile safety. And in this defense and this scheme, he's a liability back there.
And I agree.
And I hate to say that, but it might be time for Sorensen to go.
Yes, and look, we have to understand that Sorensen's been around for quite some time now. He'll be going on his 6th year in Kansas City, and look, he's got old legs. We've used Sorensen a lot. Sorensen was not only on defense, but he's on special teams, and we've really, really used Sorensen quite a bit over the years. And I like him too. I really respect Dan, but it is going to be time to move on from him, and that's because we have solidified the safety position. So with that being said, look, we have covered the depth chart on the defensive side of the ball. I think one thing that we really need to focus on and let the fans know is it is up in the air right now. But there's a lot of good things going on in Kansas City on the defensive side of the ball. We're extremely young all around. All around our team is extremely young. Yeah. And just remember, Kansas City, we've got big motors on this team. We've got guys who are all over the field, and we've got a defensive genius in Spags. So I look for us to have an incredible season and really tip the scales on the defensive side of the ball a lot more than we had even anticipated. So with that being said, Kris, I'll let you take off one last time here. What do you think overall on the defensive side of the ball going into next year? Where are we going to be ranked? And do you think that this defense is going to help us get over the hump and win a Super Bowl?
The most impressive aspect to our team last year was the offense, and that kind of carries a surprise element to it. And this year, I don't think our offense is going to necessarily surprise anybody, but I think that our defense is going to be the most impressive part to our team this year. They're not going to necessarily dominate and, kind of like we did in, I want to say it was that 97 season that you talked about on the other show, where we were keeping teams scoreless for a long period of time. But I think that is going to be impressive in the fact of how much better we are this year. If perfect world were to happen, and I could see us being a top 10 defense, absolutely, with the secondary being able to create turnovers and shut down the passing game, our defensive line able to control, and linebackers able to control the running game in front of us and be able to get after that quarterback. And like we kind of mentioned in the last show, where we could potentially see a season of 50 sacks. And I think that if that happens, man, we will absolutely be a top 10 defense for sure. And you have got number one offense with a top 10 defense. Come at me, New England. Come at me. That Super Bowl is going to be ours to take, man.
Absolutely. And I think that everybody's looking at it like that on the team, and they're meshing well together already, and players understand their roles, and that's the biggest thing is, look, there's a lot of guys out there that look lost on the defensive side of the ball, and a lot of these guys already know their roles. I know that we don't, but it's forming, it's taking shape, and we're headed into probably the best season one of the best seasons we could ever have in Chiefs Kingdom. So with all that being said, this is our defensive show today. We really wanted to break down to nitty-gritty on the defense and kind of show Chiefs Kingdom where we're standing here. So Kris, I thank you for being on our show. That is our senior NFL analyst, Kris Chavez. Man, you're welcome on the show anytime, dude. It was a pleasure.
Hey, man, as always, man, thank you. It was a pleasure being on today. Thank you.
Not a problem. It's always great talking football with you, my friend. So this is the Richard Smith Show. This is the broadcast for today. We are live here from the Kansas City Sports Update Studios. Brought to you by Arrowhead Update. Check us out on iHeartRadio, Google Podcasts, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, SoundCloud, Spreaker, Player FM, YouTube, and all third-party applications. Check us out on all social media platforms as well. And if you cannot find us there, just Google the Richard Smith Show and Kansas City Chiefs, and I promise you will find us. Have a great day, Kansas City.